those of you who, is there anybody here? There are a few people, hello. It's a very few people here who have not been playing in these various pieces and rehearsing with me, I think. But most of you have had well enough of me by now, I'm sure. And some of what I thought I would chat about, you've probably heard in bits and pieces in different contexts, but this is a way to have a little bit of a cohesive, conversation. And very much, let's just pretend we're all in my living room, and I want you to feel free to interrupt, ask questions, anything that comes to mind, just, talk, okay? This is a two-way, even though it seems like a one-way. I was thinking about topics to speak about today with all of you, because we have had a lot of conversations about many things. And the first thing that came to mind is something that I don't think gets spoken about enough, especially in any school environment, really. But I think it might be the most important thing. And it's about kindness. It's about being kind. It's about being keenly aware of other people, bringing out the best in other people, surrounding yourself with people who bring out the best in you, right? I don't think that's addressed enough. I think that we're in a society that is very stressful, needless to say, and very angst-filled, and sometimes very ugly, and sometimes very angry. And there can be reasons for that, very legitimate reasons why everybody's wanting to shake their fist at this guy. But the one thing that you don't want to do is take out your anger on other people, unless it's completely one-on-one directed at you, which it often isn't in social media, for example. You look at how people respond with each other and engage with each other on social media, which is, it overtakes our lives. It's a very big part of our lives. It will always be. We're not going to go backwards. But when you think about that disjointed community online, each one of us can make it jointed. Each one of us can make it kind. That how we choose to react to people, how we choose to respond to people, what we choose to post, how we choose to phrase what we post, means everything. And I just sort of wanted to start with that because it's something that we can all relate to, I think, and it's something that doesn't get spoken directly about enough, in my opinion. That it's something I like to talk about, but it's not something I hear a lot of other people directly addressing. Kindness, graciousness, warmth, compassion, empathy. Empathy is huge. If someone's having a bad day, the first thing is to think, if they lash out at you, is okay, you might think, ouch, that hurt. But you might also think, what's going on with them? Where are they coming from? What's causing them to act in a certain way? It's always good to think in those terms. And online, when people are invisible to us, when we can't really see them or know them beyond their little profile picture, it's that much more important to kind of try to interject some empathy and imagine what their life might be like that would cause them to say certain things, etc., and to react with kindness and an invitation for them to, put their heckles down, or whatever the term would be, We have a lot, one of the themes, you'll keep hearing me say this, some of you have heard me say this many times, each one of you has a great deal of power to change the immediate world around you, if not beyond. And that power begins with how we react to other people and what we bring out in them, how we respond to them. And it's such a beautiful thing. So I just thought I'd launch with that before we get into, other things. And again, feel free to comment on what I just said, if you have thoughts about it too, about how anything online has been positively or negatively impacting your lives in any way, because I'm sure it's a very big part of your lives. It is of mine, I've been online. I was a very early adopter of everything, electronic, technological, whatever, often before a lot of my peers were. And so I've seen this for a really long time, even though I'm an old person. But but I'm really aware of the vibe. So anyway, and so when I talk about, I'm an old person, I'm not that old, but at 60, what's been really interesting for me, and I thought it would be a fun little journey for you guys to take you through, that I started with electronic music when I was 15 years old, so a lot younger than you. And what that happened to be, when you think about 1977, I was 15, and the journey in those 45 years, exactly 45 years, has been remarkable, right, in so many ways. In technology, in education, in the way we react to each other. Of course, we didn't have anything close to social media back then. I remember when I got my first answering machine. I was 19 years old. That was a big deal. The thing was as big as a tank, cost like $100. It was a gift from my boyfriend at the time. I guess he wanted me to answer his calls or return his calls or something. I don't know. But it was like a big deal to have an answering machine. I mean, it's crazy, right? The things we take for granted. But I think it's kind of cool to have perspective on that long period of time, that swath of time, because it gives you an appreciation and for where we've come, and it also gives us the power to forensically look backwards to see where did things evolve from? How did we get from point A to point B to point C? And to be able to kind of predict where are we going next. Because technology and advances in everything is going to affect every one of our lives. And whether you like the new inventions and the new technology or not, it's going to be an inherent part of your life that even if you choose not to use it that much, you better well understand it and know what it's about, even if you choose not to use it. Our world continues to be rocked by all kinds of shifts and changes because, just because you can do something and invent something doesn't mean necessarily it's a great idea, but it's out there. So you have to kind of embrace it and accept it and understand how it works. So when I think back to 45 years ago, building little modular synthesizers, I had enrolled for summer school I grew up in New York City, in Manhattan. And in Manhattan, of course, there are wonderful conservatories, and I had enrolled in summer school at Mannes College of Music, which had a wonderful little composition department, because I knew I wanted to be a composer. I wrote really bad music from the time I was 9, and then I decided maybe I'd like to get a little better at it. And I decided I really enjoyed doing it, and I wanna pursue this and take lessons. And I had a wonderful, very patient and very supportive and encouraging teacher at Mannes that summer. And I also noticed that when I was applying for the composition stuff, that they had an introduction to electronic music class. And I've always been a total geek. I was always the kid who hooked up their parents and anybody else's parents' stereo system. I was always that person. And my mind just worked that way. I'm terrible at math, interestingly, but I was always really into technology. I mean, you'd think they would go together, but they don't, apparently. But at any rate, I signed up for this introduction to electronics class just on a whim, having really no idea what it was really going to be. And there were only, I think, 5 of us in the class, and a very patient teacher who was just, I don't know how often he bathed, but he was a really nice guy. And he was just really into these machines. And I learned all about what makes sound electronically, how to make sound, how to put these modules next to each other and connect them with a gazillion cables, patch cords as we call them, to make a simple ooh or a blip, blop, beep. I mean, the sounds were not a whole lot more interesting than that back then, but it was interesting. I wasn't moved to write great electronic music from it. It did not strike they warm the cockles of my heart, wherever the cockles might be. They were not warmed by these sounds, but I was intrigued, and I stuck with it. I thought it was really great to understand how to wire things together to make sound, to alter sound. What's an envelope generator? What's an oscillator? What's a filter? What do these things do? And of course, this is all physical. There was no digital. There was no digital back then. Everything was analog. And so you had to physically hook things up to make things happen. There were no chips involved. I don't think there were chips. There were no chips. So that was my beginning. Synthesizers existed before that, but that was my beginning, my introduction, which is still very much the dark ages when we think about now. And then I went through every year since then, from 15, 16, 17, everywhere I studied, I took an electronic music class. Again, not because it was what I wanted to write. I wasn't writing electronic music. I was just messing around with the machines and writing for instruments. But there was something in my brain that just really enjoyed the process. So I was accepted as a very young composer. I think I was their youngest one. When I was 16, I was accepted at the Aspen Music School and Festival. And lo and behold, 1978, they had Don Buchla's a Buchla, which is a very famous synthesizer. It was very big, it was very expensive, it was very special. because my teacher, Michael Tchaikovsky, who was at Juilliard as doing electronic music there, was really good friends with Morton Subotnick, who's another very well-known composer that some of you know, who's done amazing electronic music. And Buchla had given Mort this Buchla, this very famous synthesizer. What was really special about it is it not only was a bunch of modules, but it had these touch-sensitive metal keys. They didn't move up and down, but you could put your finger on them, and they would sense the electromagnetic field in your finger and control sound. And lots of knobs and buttons and patch cords, and it was just a wall of stuff, and it was fascinating. So I got to work on that machine, which was his Morton Subotnick's Silver Apples of the Moon album, I believe, was done on that machine. Mm-hmm. And it's good to know about all this history, you know, about that time in electronic music and new music in general. And Morton just had another birthday. How old was he? I can't remember. He's doing great. Yeah, Patty's going to look it up. But then, so for the next 2 summers, I had that experience at Aspen for those 2 summers. And then I went to Manhattan School of Music. I did Juilliard pre-college in New York. Being a New Yorker, that was a great advantage, you know, to be in New York and be able to go to high school and go to Juilliard at the same time. I graduated in composition at Juilliard pre-college, and then I went right into Manhattan School of Music as a composer. And there, a gentleman named Elias Tannenbaum had the electronic music studio. And there, they had a whole room of gizmos and gear, and I was in heaven. Like, it was just more knobs and more, and this was a cool thing. You know, we take what we call faders for granted. You see them on all kinds of things. Well, it was a really big deal when in synthesizing, by the time we were in, this would have been 1980, so the late 70s, all of a sudden we had machines that made sound that had what we call slide pots. That's what they're called, there's these faders. And potentiometers, the little knobs in the slide pots, that's the big word for them. And it was a really big deal to work on, like, I think it was an Oberheim or something that had the first slide pots in synthesizers, which was so much more fun than having to, you know, wire everything together. We were slowly getting into that point of this internal connection with these machines. And so there was ARP 2500, ARP 2600. I think that's the one that had the first slide pots, the ARP 2600. We had Oberheims, we had all kinds of things, still analog, right? Big tape machines. And so what are we doing with tape? We're splicing tape. You have a razor blade. It is so primitive. A razor blade and a splicing block that has these angles on which you can choose which angle you want to literally, when you're making a cut now, you probably all do GarageBand or Audacity or whatever. You've all probably done some digital audio editing. And it's just so much fun because you go, you know, click and put the ends together and you're done, right? And you can crossfade it, make it sound just perfect, get rid of the pops, the clicks, whatever. It takes 2 seconds. Well, back in the day, we had physical tape, and we would put the tape on very carefully with clean hands, lay it so carefully onto the splicing block, and then take out our sharp razor, try not to hurt ourselves, make the splice, make the cut, and you'd have to roll it over the rollers of the tape machine in order to understand where it was exactly that you wanted to make the cut. I'm doing a good tape machine imitation. It was really painstaking to figure out where you want to make the cut because you didn't want to mess up. It's not like digital where you can go undo. Splicing, the undo was a pain in the patootie, let me tell you. Undo was tape that you've used, literally Scotch tape, a version of tape, physically, tape on top of tape, sticky Scotch tape thing that's special for magnetic tape, that you have laid into your 2 ends to make them into one, and you just hope that it goes by fast enough and that you've got what we call a clean splice so that it goes by, that you don't hear bloop as it goes by, right? I mean, this is what we were dealing with in the 1970s. And the 1980s, I might tell you, I was splicing tape in my studio in the 1980s when I had my first reel-to-reel machines in my own studio. And we were splicing tape on big 2-inch, what we call the 2-inch machines, big 2-inch tape machines that you do multi-track, you know, very big sessions on, splicing tape. It was not an elegant way to work, but you work with the tools that you have, and we didn't have anything else. We didn't know anything else. It was what you did. So there's that. Then you fast forward a little bit, a few years later, when I came out to Los Angeles in 1983, I started working directly, even though I had been studying, you know, concert music. At the time, when I was at Manhattan School of Music, I was also finding ways to work commercially. I took the only commercial music class that they offered, because now conservatories offer a lot of commercial music information and classes, but back then it was extremely rare. And I had a wonderful teacher who to this day is my dear friend. He's in his 90s, Roy Eaton, who was not only a marvelous classical pianist, but he happened to be the head of advertising at a huge head of music, at a huge advertising agency in New York City, Benton and Bowles. And so very big agency at the time. Doesn't exist anymore, but it was a big deal. And so I was one of about 6 students that took his class. So I had the electronic music, and I had the commercial music class. He taught me about click tracks. He taught about how do we record in the studio. He would take me to his sessions with some of the most famous players, session players, in New York. And I'd sit in, and he'd actually turn to me and ask for my advice at the mixing board. He'd say, what do you think? Do we need more guitar here? Do we need more what? That's a great teacher, right? Someone who just brings you into the process and has faith in you. And that was the beginning of me understanding a little bit more of how the electronic world and the recording world and the jingle world, in this case, were all coming together. I had I met some people when I was 18, 19 that were doing documentary filmmaking and for low budget, late night cable TV stuff, it airs at 2 a.m. And so I was scoring some documentaries. I was getting, I was starting to get my feet wet in New York while I was going to school, writing music for picture, writing music for scoring, and I really loved it. But I was still thinking I was going to be a concert music composer, except for the fact, and I think I'm telling you the long version of all this story because it's sort of like a history lesson. And I think it's fun to give you a history lesson from the horse's mouth, so to speak, the old horse. That at the time, in 1980, 81, this is like when I was in Manhattan School of Music from 80 to 83. And at the time, there were really, especially in New York City, there were really 2 schools of concert music. There was the Uptown School, and there was the Downtown School, right? There was the Uptown meant Columbia, Princeton, the very academic sounding stuff. Some people who didn't like it would call it the nails on chalkboard music. It's great stuff, but it was very, in a certain world and very kind of elitist and very, very cliquey, that kind of a world. Yeah, and it was for very smart people who had very significant attitudes about a lot of things. I don't think a lot of them were necessarily that collaborative. And, they just had a very distinct vision of what they wanted. And they didn't care often, not always, but they often didn't care what the audience thought. They didn't care what the musicians thought. They were in their own bubble of we're going to do it this way, and this is what matters, and this is high art. Fine, that's legitimate. They have every right. So there was that. I wasn't that kind of a person. I could just tell that wasn't kind of my scene, even though I enjoyed a lot of that music. Then there was the downtown scene, which was awesome. It was performance art, it was punk, it was minimalism, and which of course was happening on the West Coast as well. Minimalism was a very big thing that was really coming to light in the 70s, and before that, in the 60s. But it was, when I was going to school, it was certainly a big thing, and performance art was. And I think that when we look at pieces like Paper Cut and things, and Kitchen Sink, and my silly things that I like to do visually, and the things I've spoken to some of you about, even today in conducting class, about my love of multimedia, that seed was probably planted by the downtown scene in New York, where people were just trying everything, and there was no right or wrong. It was very free. I wasn't really part of that scene either, but it was a little closer to my heart. But what I realized most of all is that I wasn't either downtown, which was a scene, or uptown, which was a scene. I was kind of midtown. I don't know what I was. But all I knew is I was not a candidate, really, to have a kick-ass concert music career in 1980. It was just not I was just not that kind of a composer. And the world musically, and this is really important, the world was so much smaller musically. I really say that because at the time there were so many expectations about who do you rate with? What clique is going to approve of you? Are you writing music that is approved of, basically? And if you're not part of those cliques, because it was 1980, and I'm going to get to the big punchline on this in a moment, if you're not part of those cliques, you don't have a lot of power. And you have to be honest about, am I going to really have a career? Nobody's going to really want me. And it's very hard for me to think about how to generate my own career here. It wasn't really, entrepreneurial thinking wasn't as big a thing back then. And so what did I do? I loved all kinds of music. I had already been scoring, and I always had written lots of different kinds of music. Some of the jazz tunes that some of you play and that some of you will hear tonight were written when I was 17. I was writing musical theater. I was writing pop songs, all the things I like to do. By the way, in New York City, one of the funniest things to me was that in the 1970s, when I was growing up, you had two things happening at the same time. The punk rock scene from England came over to New York, and disco. I mean, those couldn't be more wildly different, right? Punk rock and disco, and I loved it all. I was going to all the clubs. I went to everything. I exposed myself to everything, and you all should as well. Listen to everything. So I decided, I got a lucky break, so to speak. It wasn't a big break, but it was an opportunity to come out to LA and score low budget, direct-to-video piece of junk, I guarantee you. But it was an opportunity to start working, and I realized I wasn't going to have a concert music career, not in this climate, no way. So I'm going to go into commercial music. I like film scoring. I like doing all that. And that's what I did for 15 years. A long time, reasonably. I did no concert pieces at all, none, zero. And I enjoyed it to a point. It is a very different thing than writing concert music because they who pay the piper call the tune. And, it's very different than art music where you can do whatever you want and no one's going to say boo. They'll either play it or they won't. They'll commission you or they won't. But it's a matter of what you want to do is what you want to do as an artist. In music for picture, music for media, for the film arts, for gaming, for anything that is collaborative like that, you're working for someone else. You're working to support their vision. It's not about you and your great music, although they really do want your great music, but they care much more, really, at the end of the day, about their great game or their great movie or their great TV show or whatever it is. It's about that. And it's about making the psychology work for what they want to accomplish emotionally with their material. You are secondary. Sometimes an equal partner, but really secondary. You come into what's called post-production. They've already made their picture or their game or whatever. Games can be a little more collaborative at the same time. I won't talk about games because that's a little different animal. But let's say film and TV, they've already done their thing. And if you're lucky, you've seen a script or you've seen early cuts or whatever, but you can't really start working other than coming up with some ideas. You can't start putting the score together until you have what we call a locked picture. Or very close to locked, because the minute locked means everything, they're not going to make any more cuts or changes. When you make a cut or a change, what changes? The timing. What's music about? Timing. So it is a horrible thing for a composer when a director says, oh, I just took out 3 seconds on that scene because it was dragging, and you're going, oh boy, I got to now find the time to take out.
Do you ever deal with temp tracks and directors who don't want to part with their temp tracks?
All the time. Yes, that is a huge thing. Yeah. Directors work with they're called temp tracks, temporary music, and editors especially, that they lay in while they're cutting together a picture before the composer has been given anything to score or before the composer has delivered anything that they can work with. And it's very often not your own music, unless you are Thomas Newman. And one of the funnier things is Thomas Newman is one of my favorite film composers and a great guy. He often has to score to his own music, which is wildly distracting. You're trying to do something new, and they've laid in American Beauty or whatever. It's crazy. But at any rate, this is sort of the bugaboo of many composers in film music is having to deal with a temp track because the director, especially on a low budget picture, because the director will have what we call temp love. Temp love is when they have laid in a John Williams score with 90 players soaring through their scene. That's just awesome. And your budget is $5,000. And you're trying to say to them, you try to stave it off of the path and not let them fall in love with music that they will never be able to afford to have. If they want it live and all that, there's just no way. You try to get them to fall in love and use material that's going to sound a lot more on the scale of what you're going to be delivering, because that's what you've been asked to do. Now, this is where synths, of course, come in. I'm jumping the gun on this a little bit, but just to come full circle on the temp love thing, one of the biggest challenges, I will say, starting really in the 90s when we started to get good samples, good fake instruments that are recorded, is that increasingly directors didn't want to pay for live musicians, which was a shame. They wanted to cut corners. They didn't want to pay for the live musicians. And so what do? They say, well, you've got a Casio, you've got a gizmo, a synthesizer, give it to us that way. Let's just make it a synth score. And at the time, samples were not what they are now. Not that any sample is good. I'm not pro-sample. I use them all the time, but I am not pro-sample. Not that they were great, but you had to do what you had to do. You make it sound the best you could. It was something I actually was pretty good at. But I did not enjoy doing it. And what you often would do is scrape together enough of a budget to bring at least 1 or 2 or 3 live players in to record on top. So it would give it that sheen of sounding live, and this is still done to this day. This is a common practice. But this was a real problem. They'd fall in love, temp love, not have a budget. You end up doing a synth score, orchestra, boom, orchestra in a box. Not ideal. But going back, I want to just go back to those 80s, because my first studio was when I was 22, I guess the math is, when I was in 1984. What happened in 1984? The Apple Macintosh happened. It was a big deal, really big deal. Suddenly, desktop computing, the things we take totally for granted. Growing up, we didn't have computers growing up. We didn't have phones. We didn't have any of that. It was a very big deal to suddenly have desktop publishing and a printer. And even though we didn't have internet, by the way, at the time, but we had, that wasn't for a number of years later, but we had desktop publishing. And that suddenly started to open up the music field in a really big way. Because all of a sudden, you could hit a button and print out your own music and not necessarily be beholden to a gatekeeper of a publisher, right? Nothing wrong with publishers, and we will talk about publishing, and I have with some of you already at some length. But you all of a sudden had the power to print out your own music. Remember, we didn't have PDFs, folks, okay? I mean, I know, because you're thinking, well, just send a PDF. I know, it didn't work that way. I couldn't do it. So how we would have loved that. We couldn't have printed out our music before or disseminated it, because how many hand copies? You could make Xeroxes, but in this hand copy. It changed a lot of things very quickly. But the thing that changed everything in a very historic way, that is absolutely as important as the printing press, and I actually wrote an article a number of years ago with this title, The Internet, which happened in the mid-90s for everybody. I mean, it happened earlier than that. It was sneaking in by the late 80s, by the mid to late 80s, by the early 90s. Some people were having it by mid-90s. By 94, 95, everybody had email, right? I think that's a reasonable, am I in the pocket there with the year, right? So mid-90s, all of a sudden, the world truly opened up in a way that was unimaginable, because everybody had access. Everybody had access, and this is access on several levels at once. Because now we don't need the publishers, we don't need the record companies if we don't want them, because we can, bing, hit send, and not only print something out for ourselves, but disseminate it around the world at 2 a.m. in our pajamas, drinking a glass of wine. Puff, puff, there, have it here. Switzerland, have my score, It's pretty fantastic, pretty fantastic. It changed the face of the music business. And with everybody having the internet and the things that go with the internet, social media, YouTube, all these things that quickly came along, what happened is people were being exposed to everything, to every kind of music, in a way that even cable TV before wasn't doing quite as good a job on. What that meant is that the tastes changed. And in the concert music world, there really is a point to all this. There is a connective tissue through all this. In the concert music world, all of a sudden, those of us who couldn't have gotten arrested in 1980, suddenly taste changed and expectations changed. And we didn't need people patting us on the head, approving of us. We had to basically not only do our best work, but then reach out and make our own relationships professionally, to make our own careers in a way that we didn't have the ability to nearly as easily up until then. And because we didn't need to be approved of anymore, what we needed to do is make relationships, right? To form connections with musicians, to send a little email out to Zeitgeist and say, hi, I've got a new percussion and clarinet piece, and would you like to see it? Because it might be up your alley. And then they say yes, and that it's just that easy. And you can do that with ensembles all over the world. Could not do that before. So there's a lot of different kinds of access. So there's the access of being able to share your work as an artist. There's also the financial access, which I touched on regarding publishing. If your music is being published by another company, that means they're taking, for the sales, they're taking 90% of that income, of the sales, of that music. You get 10%. Hopefully, in exchange for the 90%, what you get is they're printing, they're binding, they're publishing, they're shrink wrapping, they're marketing, they're sending it out, they're fulfilling the orders, they're marketing, if you're lucky, they're marketing, they're showing you up at displaying you at conferences, they're marketing. This isn't a perfect world. Many publishers don't do quite enough for their composers, but some do, certainly. It's not, it's a mixed bag. You just have to know who you're dealing with. But the financial access, the financial freedom that came to artists with the internet cannot be understated. Think about that, because we can now create our own income. And we even have a website that we have created because of the internet with a PayPal shopping cart thing on it, right? That people just send you money and you fulfill the order. This happens every day. You wake up, there is money in your bank account, and then it's up to you to fulfill the order. Otherwise, they will get very angry if you don't. Like, where's my order? That's magic. And you guess what? You get 100% of the money, not 10%. Then, if you're smart and you're running a business, you create what we call retail distribution deals, where you share the money and you give them 50% or 25% or whatever your deal is. You give them a percentage to carry your music, and you print it out for them and you ship it to them and they fulfill it. They usually fulfill the orders, but you get a lot more of the money. And so that's a shared thing, and it's a great partnership. That's what I think is a very wonderful thing, are these business partnerships, because these companies will get your music out all over the world. The third, so we've talked about the access, artistic access, that all of a sudden we had artistic access. And we've talked about financial access, because suddenly you can make all this money, and it goes directly into your PayPal account or whatever. The other access is equity, because all of a sudden, everybody, no matter what they looked like, no matter what their background was. If they had 2 dimes to rub together to have, a laptop and an internet, okay, there is an economic entry level, but it's fairly low in the scheme of things. So if you can get to that economic entry level of having a connection and having, a little bit of technology, you have equal access. You all know that much of the repertoire, whether it's band or orchestra or whatever, it's by white men. That has been the history of classical music, white men. And I always joke, there's nothing wrong with white men. I am married to a white man, it's okay. But there is so much more music making to be done in the world by all kinds of people who are equally talented. They're not better than. I joked to some of you the other day, I said, we're equally capable, but women, people of color, white people, equally capable of writing bad music, equally capable of writing great music, right? We can write crap, we can write it, it's all equal. And until the internet, really, we didn't have a chance to participate on an even playing field, because all these companies were largely run by white people and males, and it's not that they were so always intentionally discriminatory or not inclusive. It's just that they never really made the effort to reach out and find the new voices. It didn't really occur to them. And so they'd keep choosing the same people to publish. The publishers would keep choosing the same kinds of people. And why? Because they're running a business and those pieces sell, so why not get more from these people? Right? It's cyclical. Get more from them. Get more. It's working, right? It's very inside-the-box thinking, right? And forget about equity and diversity. It's kind of boring artistically, isn't it, right? If it's the same voices all the time, you're not making use of all the many voices that are out there. So things really changed wonderfully with the ability to hit send, because now everybody has access. And what has happened over the years, and you see this in band music, for example, is that we have so many more composers who are people of color, so many more composers who are non-binary, so many composers who are female, so many composers who are everything else than white guys. And it's all beautiful. We're still not at parity yet. We have still a long way to go. But it's because we have these conversations that we're doing a lot better. The last conference I went to, usually on average, we're still at, believe it or not, it's a pathetically bad number, 5 to 7% of all the music you hear on film, TV, and in concert halls is written by non-white male people, okay? 5 or 7%, that's very low, right? Inexcusable. It's changing, it is going up. It's like at glacial speed, though, but it is getting better. But I was recently at a conference where It was a CBDNA conference, which is the College Band Directors National Association. They have regional conferences everywhere. You recently had one here in Wisconsin, I think, right? And I was just at one last month in Tacoma and Washington. That's my region. And the one I had gone to on the West Coast, I'm part of what's called the Western Northwestern region of this organization. It's a great advocacy organization for band directors and composers. The one I had gone to pre-pandemic, let's say, it was 2018. We missed one because of the pandemic. But the previous one, there were 44 pieces in 3 days on these concerts. One piece by a woman. No pieces by a black composer. No pieces by an Asian composer. Nobody. Just, there might have been one person who might have been Latino, but I wasn't sure. I can't, given the name, hard to tell. But, I mean, it was pathetic. It was just pathetic. And I'm like, I'm there. And the music was all really good. I'm just going, really? And I talked to I know a lot of these band directors, and I talked to them. I said, are you aware that, and you know what? They were, and I was very friendly. I'm always incredibly nice. You're just bringing it to their attention, because they just are not aware. I liken it, the metaphor is they're swimming in water the same temperature as their body. They don't even feel the water, right? There are many metaphors you could use, but that's one of them. And they're just unaware, because it doesn't occur to them to look past the repertoire that they know and the composers they know, until someone like me or you guys come up to them and say, I'm just curious, of the last 3 years of your programming, how many women or people of color composers have you included on your concerts? And they turn either beet red or rather pale. It can go in either direction. And they're embarrassed. And I don't want them to feel shame or embarrassed. I want them to make a change. I don't want them to feel bad. I want them to act differently. That's what I want. And so I immediately say, no, don't worry about it, but let me help you find, some people. Let me turn you on to a bunch of things. This happened enough times that I actually was moved to make, and I'd love you to visit it, my own programming resources page on my website. That gets a lot of hits around the world now, which makes me very happy, and I'll talk about that in a second. But you have to bring it to their attention. So the good news is, when I was talking about numbers, the good news is that at the CBDNA concert I was just at last month, which did include 3 of my pieces, there were 25% of the pieces were by women, and that was considerably better, right? And some black people, and I think we had Asian composers. Well, I know we had Asian composers because one of them, Viet Quang, was the composer in residence, and it was much better balanced. It was much better. So we're making stride. And the best news is one band director, Ed Powell at Pacific Lutheran University, great guy. He did a concert that happened to be all women except for one composer. All the composers were women. And the best of all, he did not mention that. He did not say anything about it. It was just a normal concert. Just like no one's ever said, here's a concert of all white men. No one has ever said that. We're doing Beethoven and Brahms and it's going to be awesome. No one said, and look, it's all white men. That's about how silly I feel when I'm on women's concert at this point. We can talk about that. It's a very double-edged sword, these what I call these ghettoized, segregated concerts. It was important years and years ago when women just didn't have a lot of access, especially before the internet. It was very important to feature women however you could, and people of color, everybody, anybody who's not a white guy. But now, that ship is different. It's a different waters now. Everybody does have access. And so now our responsibility is to raise awareness and to normalize the participation of every artist in every field of every background, right? Don't make me a zoo exhibit like, oh, look, it's March, it's Women's Month. I didn't know we needed a month, but we have a month. We don't get the other 11, but we get one. And we get 1 month, and it's March. And they do these all women's concerts, all women concerts. And they always do these. And that's okay it's fine, actually. It's very nice if you are also including women on every one of your other concerts throughout the year, and people of color, and yada, yada. Because February is Black History Month, right? So the black composers get February, the women get March. I don't know where everybody else falls in the spectrum, but it's we need more months, basically. But at any rate, if you're programming a person of color and a female and a 3-legged donkey on every one of your programs, awesome. If you want to do a special program for one of those groups, good for you. But What it is most of the time is what we call virtue signaling. You know that term? Virtue signaling. It's like somebody patting themselves on the back saying, yeah, I'm going to give women a shot. You know, I'm going to play a black person's music. Ooh. Virtue signaling. And so they make us into a little bit of a zoo exhibit. It's like the dog dancing on its hind legs. It's not that it does it well, it's that it does it at all. Not good. Not good. It's like let's point. Let's look. Oh, women. It's all women. They're different. No, we're not. What we want is to. I'm glad you're laughing. This is great. It makes me so happy when people laugh, because I think this is great to have a very good sense of humor about, because that's how we change it, you know. And I see the humor in all of this, and it's like, you know, I'm constantly doing the face palm as I look at the world around me, like it's 2022, folks. So anyway. We want to normalize, that's a good word, normalize everybody's participation in the arts or in anything else, okay? Normalize it. So I've spoken up for quite a number of years, and I've written about this. I don't want to be the dog biting the hand that feeds it, because needless to say, in the beginning of my career, I was on a lot of all-women concerts. And I was probably excluded from some, too, because of my name. So, I mean, I can't tell you the number of people who thought, and still do sometimes, that I'm a guy, which is fine. Anyway, I was always treated wonderfully by women's groups. And I'm a member and an advocate and a sponsor of some women's groups. There is an Alex Shapiro Prize with the International Alliance for Women that sponsors every year a prize and mentorship for a wind band piece from a woman, because we need more women's voices. It's a women's organization. So I'm all for helping women and for all of the help we can give. But do I think that all women concerts are a good thing? No, I don't. And so it's a tricky thing, because I write about it, and I've been, you know, I've benefited from it, but we don't need them the way we needed them when I was starting my career 25 years ago. So it's a different thing, and a lot of people haven't kept up with the changes. So I'm being wonderfully frank with you, you know, but it's important. So that's those are the three prongs of how technology, computers and the internet, have changed history and changed the world and changed the arts for the better, artistically, financially, and in terms of equity and access. It's something that's so easy to not see or to take for granted, because we all have phones, we all have laptops, we're all online all the time. We don't even think about it. We just don't think about it. But don't take it for granted. Do you be aware of what this power is that we all have in the palm of our hands, and use the power. Use the power. And speaking of the palm of your hands, now I'm going to go back into technology. Keep in mind, I know that 2007 was a long time ago for many of you. But for some of us, it wasn't that long ago. And that's when the iPhone came out. Not that long ago. The iPhone is still pretty new. And guess what? None of us can imagine, even remember, how did we live without these things? How did we live without a smartphone? How did we text our friends and tell them where to meet us? How did we get to, I watched some old Seinfeld episodes. I don't know if you know that TV show. And it all took place in the 90s before phones. Actually, there's some later episodes where they're all carrying those big suitcase phones. They've got these really huge phones, that which always cracks me up, because I had one of those too. The thing weighed a ton. I don't think you could get that, through baggage claim. You'd have to check it, It was huge. But now we have these tiny little things. So it was hilarious to watch. This is back in the days when there were payphones everywhere, on every corner. Some of you have never seen a payphone. Good. They were disgusting. You had to speak into this thing that a million other dirty people have spoken into. Yeah. But at any rate, and go into this booth that, like, God knows who's peed in the booth. I mean, this was New York, right? The payphone booths were a scary, daunting place. I always left the door open. I don't care how many sirens were going by. I was like, I'd get into the payphone booth and just make sure that I wasn't stuck in there. So they always smelled terrible. But life in New York. But you look at these Seinfeld episodes, and they're trying to meet up to see a movie. It's hilarious. They have no way of reaching each other. Think about it. Like, they're trying to, maybe by then they had answering machines. They would leave a message, but then you have to go to a payphone to check your messages. I mean, think about it. It was very hard for them to just do the simplest things that we get onto Snapchat or texting or Facebook messaging or whatever. It's like, I'm here, sup, bye. We couldn't do that. It's fun to give you this perspective. But anyway, so the iPhone, the smartphone, is very still new, and now we can't imagine, even shortly after it came out. Once we had it, we couldn't imagine living without it. Well, guess what? There is something coming down the pike in just a handful of years, and that we can't quite define it, but we know aspects of it, and it's going to be something just like the phone that we can't live without. But even though, just like the iPhone, if I had asked you 5 years earlier, if I had asked you, let's say in the year 2000, what can't you live without, or could you describe the phone or describe any of this, you wouldn't have been able to do it. None of us could. We would have known aspects of it, like there might be a TV watch or a TV thing or some video thing. We might know aspects, but we wouldn't really be able to define what the smartphone was really going to be able to do for us and all those little apps and everything. And we're in that place right now. We're actually always in that place, but I think we're right at that place now where something very big is going to be changing our lives, our daily lives, that we can't quite define it. Now, I liken it to, that thing about blind people and an elephant. You put a bunch of blind people around a large animal, and one's got the trunk, which has a certain texture. The other's got the tail, which is, tail-like. The other's got the leg. And they're all describing that an elephant is like this, right? And they're all describing very different things because they don't have the full picture. They don't have the full picture. It's kind of like the trombone sitting in the trombone section. You really can't hear the clarinets, can you? You don't have the full picture. So fan music is like that. So what we have now, it is present day, is augmented reality, virtual reality, AI, right? Artificial intelligence. So much of your daily lives is actually driven by AI in ways that you don't even see. And it's kind of terrifying, but it is so true. And it's not going away. It's only getting more and more so. Some of this is used for great good, and it's wonderful. Some of it will be used for evil. One of the things for people my age and older, and a little bit younger too, I would say, anybody from, I'd say, 40 and up, maybe even as young as 40, one of the big things that is being challenged, has been for a long time, but will really be going out the window, is the concept of privacy. The concept of privacy. We are in a very AI bot-driven, increasingly robotically driven world, and your private thoughts at this point might very well be easily accessed, which can be a fun thing for music notation. But there will be good ways to use it, but there will be kind of challenging ways that it's going to be used. That a lot of what you consider private, a lot of your information as it is now with online stuff, you know very well how you have given up a lot of your privacy. So that Meta, formerly Facebook, and Google and Amazon can all take part and they know every bit of your buying behaviors, mine too. They know everything you're going to do. It's called predictive behavior. They know it all. They know the reason that you think that your phone is listening to you because you get ads for things that you're interested in is because the predictive behavior of these bots is phenomenal, and it's only getting more and more so. These bots are doubling their abilities and their own internal intelligence about every 3 months now. Doubling. We're talking about unbelievable, massive amounts of processing ability. And we're giving them the content. Every time we click on something, we're giving them the information that they then learn from, right? I'm simplifying it, but this is pretty much, how it goes. There's many layers to this. But I just want you to be aware that all these things, the artificial intelligence, the robotics is going to be huge. It's going to help us do a lot of things. I can't wait for a really good self-driving car because I haven't been able to drive for years because of my vision, and I can't wait to have something that will drive me around that is not my husband. That would be really nice to take some of the onus around him, off of him. But it's the concepts of, in terms of performance, what we're going to be able to do with augmented and virtual reality is going to be beautiful. Beautiful. The way I like to do all this multimedia stuff, and I try to immerse an audience in sound that's swirling around them through speakers and visuals on the stage and what have you. Just think what we can do when we're in hybrid spaces and are able to really interact with each other. Zoom is a prototype. Zoom is a joke, right? Come on, it's two-dimensional. You're shiny little faces in shiny little boxes, and we can barely hear each other, and we certainly can't talk at the same time, much less play music or sing at the same time. It's a prototype. We're going to be laughing, as we are now, knowing the limitations of Zoom. We're going to be laughing in just a few years about, remember when we were on Zoom? It's like, remember Friendster? I don't know, or MySpace. So quaint. And remember flip phones. Who was I? Who is it that had a flip phone or was just got out of a flip phone? Was it you? That's right. It was you. I knew I was having that conversation. So there's always a holdout. But Evan's like, I like my flip phone. I want my flip phone. I said, how do you text? He just says slowly. But I want to encourage everybody to two things, to understand how all these technologies work. Avail yourself of the many documentaries and things that you can dial into online that will just open up a world of how this is working. And don't be afraid of the stuff, but be wary, certainly be aware of the negative aspects of how these things are going to be used, but also be aware of the beautiful and good things for which they can be used. And be innovators and use the technology for your own pursuits, whatever they are, whether it's in the arts or something else entirely. Use this technology to make your life and other people's life better. It's going to be great. It's going to have all kinds of amazing power that is mind-bending when you see it. But yeah, it has to be used in the right way. And it has to be used creatively. Be creative. Be as creative in your lives as you are in your art making, right? So the technology, so I kind of had fun walking you through in slow motion. This is a long talk about it, but to take you from 1978 to 2022 and beyond, to give you the relativity of everything, of how everything's interconnected, and why the internet is as important as the printing press hundreds of years ago when the Gutenberg Bible was printed. When books could be printed, you could take a book from Italy to France. Wow. And share information.
In different languages.
In different languages, exactly. You could share information with people who didn't even speak your own language. Wow. So that was huge, right? That changed the world, to share information. And that, of course, is what the internet does. But now we can all share information for better and for worse, right? There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of junk on the internet. And that our job is to be able to decipher and sift through and know what's trustable and what's good and what isn't. Know what's lies and know what's fact. And sometimes it's very, very hard to discern. That's why you just have to keep consuming it and learning what trusted resources are and understanding how to interpret, what you're reading about anything, There are so many sources. It could be the most benign thing you're looking up for a school paper, but you might get, 50 different answers, and you have to be smart enough to figure out which answers are probably more correct than others, on any subject. So it's a lot of the onus is on us in the information age and beyond. The onus is on us to use it really well and to use it discerningly, but to use it with great gusto. Don't shy away from it. It is the reality. And you do want to understand it and you want to keep up with it. It is easy to get left behind. And I never want to be the 90-year-old who is, and I'm very sympathetic to it, they can't do online banking, they can't do texting, they can't do all these things that we kind of take for granted now, and they're shut out. And it's very frustrating for them, right? It's very hard for them in this because there are a lot of tools that they're just not comfortable using. And I don't want to be that. I don't think any of us should be that. If we can just keep up with it, that's a good thing. You'll understand it. Even if you don't use it, you'll at least understand it. So that's my little proselytizing. So I've spoken enough. You speak to me. Who has something? Thoughts? Yeah.
You mentioned you had a website. Do you know what? Can I have the title of it? For the finding the music thing?
Oh, sure. You mean the URL of my site? Yes, it's Alex Shapiro, one word, alexshapiro.org, O-R-G. Don't go to .com, you'll get a really strange person. Some strange dude. I have a very funny story about that. Okay, here's my story. Years and years ago, you got to hear this. Years and years, there are a million Alex Shapiros out there. Very few of them are female. Some of them are, but most of them are guys. And Shapiro is a really common name. Yes, and we took up like 7 pages of the New York City phone book back when we had phone books. Who has a phone book now? But at any rate, in the late 90s, when I put my website together around 98 or so, I told you I was an early adopter of this stuff, and I figured out how to do MP3s and all this stuff before everybody was doing it. It was really fun. So I decided, well, I should have alexshapiro.com. That would kind of make sense. So I tried to get my domain name to buy it, and it was already taken. and I did a little research to find, who owns alexshapiro.com, because I figured, well, they didn't have a site up. That was the thing. There was no major site. There was nothing. It was just a placeholder. It was just something that somebody had bought. And so I decided, well, I'll reach out to them and I'll see if I can make it worth their while a little bit, and I'll give them some money and they will give me that, and I'll give them all the other Alex Shapiros, the .org, the .net, whatever they want. Well, I contact this person. Turns out to be a 19-year-old sophomore at Princeton. And at the time, this was a long time ago. And I write him a really nice email, short and sweet, saying, hi, I'm this, and already I had a sort of established career, doing my music thing. And I was certainly getting a lot of email and all that. And I said, I'd really like to be able to obtain this domain because I'm kind of a public person and there's a lot of email and a lot of traffic on. And and I made it clear I'd make it worth his while. And anyway, he wrote me back. It was hilarious. He said, well, I'll give you the dramatic reading of the email because this is how it came through. Well, I don't want to be a loser like you and be left out of the .coms. I don't want to be a loser like you, he said. And I'm thinking, okay, I don't blame you. I wouldn't want to be me either. And so, I don't want to be a loser like you. And so I'm not going to give up my name. You're not the first Alex Shapiro to ask me, he said. He had like a total attitude. And I'm like, really? And I thought, wow, that's what you could have just said no in a polite way. You didn't have to get in my face about it. But nonetheless, I just let that pass, and I just, out of spite, not only did I get the .org, I got the .net, and I got them all. There you go. So no other Alex Shapiro now can have their own name. But I really was hoping. Anyway, so then there were a few other exchanges with him. He put up, it became evident to him immediately that what I had told him in my first email was quite true. He suddenly started getting a lot of mail, a lot of email from me. Some of which he would share with me, some of which he just trashed, most of which probably. It got to be so much mail that he never really put up a proper website. I don't know what he's got now, but at the time it was just a placeholder. Then it was a placeholder onto which he said, if you're looking for other less important Alex Shapiros, click here. I kid you not. It was great. It was great. Then I didn't say a word. I thought this was hysterical. And then a few years later, it morphed into something, if you're looking for Alex Shapiro, the composer, please click here. Anyway, he's had to go to all this effort to redirect people from his site to me when he could have made $500 or something off of me, because he still doesn't, he's not a public person at all. He's like some IT person or whatever.
You need to meet him.
I do. I need to meet him. He actually, I think years later, he actually sent me some kind of email sort of apologizing for having been a jerk all those years earlier. And I felt, and by now I don't want the .com. No one would find me at this point. But I just thought it was so funny. What a way to deal with somebody. We circle right back to kindness, to the beginning of this talk. Like, really, if someone reaches out to you for something you don't want to give them, don't call them a loser. Just say, no, thank you, but thanks. I hope you have a great day. Not interested. Anyway, so yeah, Alex at alexshapiro.org. And the site, you can hear anything, you can see things. If you want to see any perusal scores, I'd be happy to send them to you. Just drop me an email, and you can see anything you want. You can listen to everything. There's a ton of music on there. And I've got a pretty big YouTube channel, too, that's got a lot of stuff on it, of varying degrees of perfection, as we say. There is no perfection. There is no perfection, ever. There shouldn't be. We're human. There is no perfection.
Do you do all the managing of all of that yourself?
Mm-hmm. Geek.
Yeah. No, that's a lot
I
of time.
program that whole site. I do every pixel. Yeah. But I enjoy it. I find it relaxing. It's like a hobby. I find it relaxing to do. But sometimes it's a little overwhelming. I mean, things pile up and then I get to them. I add a whole bunch of concerts or a bunch of whatever, But it's fun. Yeah. And that's another thing, coding, having those abilities to, code and do things like that is really important. It's a really great skill set for you all to have. It saves you a lot of money. That's the other thing, when I felt lucky that I had that part of my brain kicked in, the geekometer was strong in me. And so when I needed stuff done, I saved so much money because I could program my own website. I could taught myself how to use Sibelius early on. When it came out, I was one of their ambassadors, like a beta tester for them. So I taught myself all this stuff because it's very expensive to hire a music copyist. I use one now for the final rounds of, before I publish my big scores. The chamber music I do all myself, but the big scores, I copy the working versions. You all are playing off of my copying for free, which I think is fine. It's acceptable. But I have a wonderful music prep guy that makes everything look fabulous, and he's not cheap, But there's no way I could have afforded that when I was starting out. So the more you can do, coding, copying, anything that you can do for yourself, the more money you will save. And also, you don't have to wait on anybody else to do it for you. And that is another really big aspect of it. Usually when you want something done, you kind of just want it done, like right away, right? But if you're asking someone else to do it, you might wait a week or two or whatever, or longer, depending on what the thing is. And meanwhile, in our business, time is of the essence. People need to know about updated information about things. So I learned early on that it was much better to take the reins and be able to, do things myself. So being self-sufficient.
Do you have, mostly for the students, but also some of us older students in the room as well, because all of this can be sort of daunting when you're first starting out in your career. Do you have any advice for people, like where to start first, or what are some good steps to begin with?
Absolutely. And it can be daunting because it seems like I do a million things at once, but it's never at once. Even computers, by the way, that seem like they're processing everything at the same time, they're not. It's serial. It's just really fast serial, so it looks like it's all happening at the same time. And so that's what life is for us. It's not that we are doing everything all at once every day. It's just that it collects, and you're putting your focus on different things on different days to make it all happen, so that you end up with this collection of a lot of stuff that has occurred, and that has been accomplished. I think my advice for, if you want a website, there are very simple websites. WordPress has great themes, for instance. Wix now has gotten up in the world. It started out kind of junky, but now I think it's much better. But I like WordPress, and again, they have themes. You don't have to design everything from the ground up. So for technology, and having a presence in the world, that's a great start. It's free, you can pay money for themes, but they have a ton of free themes. Themes are the skins, the way your website looks. It is very important for any professional not only to have a social media presence, but to have their own website. Social media is where people go to engage with us and to learn, small bits of information. But anybody who wants to really know what you're about is going to want to go to your website, where that's the appropriate place to put everything, and the kitchen sink, in there. And so that's why, no pun intended. And so that's why my website is really, really filled with a lot of stuff. And that way, anything people need, if they need a press kit, if they need photos, if they need a bio, if they just want to know more about a piece, if they want to know more about an event, they can go there and quickly look it up. So websites are really important. If for whatever business you're in, it's very different. It's a different animal than a social media presence. Social media is social. It's interactive. Websites are you sharing what you want with the world in a more one-way way, and then the interactive part is somebody emails you, through the website. But it is more of a one-way thing. But it's a source of information. So when people want to know about your great flute career, they go on and there you go. They figure it out, and it's all there. But don't be daunted by all the tasks. Just look at one task at a time. It's very easy in this world with so much going on to get overwhelmed. And everybody, all of us get overwhelmed. Don't be daunted. Just inhale, exhale, and look at, it's like a to-do list. You might have a gazillion things. If you ever finish your to-do list, you're dead. It means your life is incredibly boring and you're done. You'll never get to the bottom of your to-do list, and that's a good thing. Okay? I have never, ever reached the bottom of my to-do list. It's like you'll never see the picture at the bottom of the cereal bowl. Okay? It just won't happen. But what you do is you'll triage to some degree, the things that are really important that you need to do. And then there are the long-term things that you really would like to get to, some of which you will never get to and others you will eventually get to, right? And your to-do list is kind of like that. If you look at the whole to-do list, it's completely overwhelming. And what do? You go lie on the sofa and do a video game or something on your phone. That's what I do. If I get overwhelmed, I'm just going to go to Wordle or Pangrams or Spelling Bee or the New York Times crossword. It's like I'm just so done. Or Two Dots. I like Two Dots. Anybody play Two Dots? Anybody play that one? Yeah, it's a good one. Good mind game. Anyway, I get overwhelmed and I just check out entirely, which is really productive, isn't it, right? It's like, it's the opposite of, let's cross something off the to-do list. It's like, oh my gosh, let's just ignore this entirely and go somewhere else. So there's that, and that's okay. That's perfectly acceptable. We all need the downtime, because your mind is solving problems when you are in your subconscious, when you are doing the puzzles on the phone. It really is it's good. You need to do that. But ultimately, when you look at the to-do list, instead of seeing the whole to-do list, choose one thing. It can be the easiest thing. A lot of people, experts, they always say, oh, do the hardest thing first. You know what? That might be really good advice. I don't know how realistic it is. Sometimes you just need to start someplace and do the easy thing first. Like, oh, I just need to send this person an email with this bit of information. I can do that. You know, I can do that. And then even that can be daunting, right? Because you have to then work it back in your mind and say, okay, what do they need? What information do they need? Where am I going to find it? How should I present it to them? You know, there are many steps in the simplest thing, right? But break everything down into small steps, I kid you not, and you will get it done, one thing at a time. And that means, do it to completion before you move on to the other thing. If you have, 10 things and you've done a little of each, guess what? You're going to be equally frustrated the next day, because none of those 10 things have gotten done. You may have moved the peg forward a little bit on them, but none of them are completed. And I think nothing feels better than knocking something off the to-do list. So if you take the one thing, to avoid being daunted, one thing, focus on it, and break it down in your mind, even if it daunts you. Like I said, okay, now I got to back work, what I have to do. And just figure out the steps. Everything takes steps. So it's usually backwards. Well, in order to do this, I have to do that. Oh, but in order to do that, I got to do this. And in order to do that, well, this has to be in place. And suddenly your tiny little to-do is a 1 hour production, right, of getting all that together. But it's 1 hour, you've gotten it done, you've made whoever's depending on it happy, you've made yourself relieved, you've accomplished something, it feels good. Maybe you take a break and go play something on your phone, and then you go back and do the next thing. That's how I avoid being daunted, because my schedule is nuts, as you can imagine. Because I'm composing, I'm running a publishing company, and I'm doing a lot of advocacy work, a lot of speaking, a lot of, working on boards and participating, and before the pandemic, a great deal of international traveling. And so all of that was a lot to juggle. So that was my way of, getting stuff done.
Where does composing fit in? I mean, do you carve out a certain time every day, or?
Yeah, I always do. I think it's really helpful to schedule your life, because if you don't give yourself time, no one else is going to give it to you. I guarantee you. And you know this for practicing, it's the same thing, right? Or for preparing pieces. You have to treat your time with yourself with the same respect that you would treat a dinner date, that you would treat a rehearsal, that you would treat anything. It's absolutely the same. That what I do when I'm on deadline, usually, the beginnings of a piece, you're just working on things, you don't have to be on a tight schedule. But when it's time to really get down and put notes on the page and really get something happening, then I have absolute cordoned off composing time. Everybody works at different times of the day. That's different. Some people are early morning people. Some people are vampires. I'm a vampire. And so what I like to do is and I'm also on the West Coast, so I'm already 3 hours or more behind a lot of other people. And so I like to start off, have my morning coffee, and then do all the admin stuff and kind of swat that away. Fill the orders, answer the emails, do what needs to be done, swat. And then I feel like, okay, I've reached the point where no one is tugging at my hem for desperately for the rest of the day, at least. There will be more tomorrow, but all the other things can wait. So, I like to get that, because that clears my head personally. Everybody works differently, but that clears my head. Deal with the people who need something from me right now. Okay, I've taken care of that. And then I can, play a game on my sofa, and then go back and switch into the other gear and turn to a right angle. My studio is an L. It's a nice room, and it's an L where my admin setup is here, overlooking the water. And then I turn this way, and oh, hi, I didn't know you were over there. I have no peripheral vision. Hi. And I turn over here, and I discover two really cool people. And I turn over here, and I'm writing on my music rig. So I always joke it's the 90-degree turn of the day. The 90 degrees of, okay, we're dropping the admin hemisphere of the brain and going to the other hemisphere of the brain, which is the creative brain. So for me, that sometimes happens. That usually happens by the late afternoon, and then there's a dinner break, and then if I'm on deadline, if the deadline is looming, then after dinner I go back to work. So.
Well, just a comment. It's so nice to hear that instead of it being just who you know and who you network with, that now it's being more inclusive for particularly women and minorities to some of the what you know, so that your talents are recognized. For years, it's been a struggle for all my life, for sure.
Yeah.
You know,
What field are you in?
performance, music,
Yeah.
you know. And, you know, as a trumpet player, female trumpet player,
Oh, yeah,
been a tough road.
very
I
tough.
mean, you have to, and instead of getting in by your performance level, you have to use both elbows, make a break. You
Yeah.
know,
Make your own space.
yeah,
Make your own space.
yeah.
Like being on a New York City club dance floor where literally everybody's so crowded. What do? You learn to dance with your arms a little bit out here, and that creates personal space. That's how you do it. You have to make your own space. Yep, it's true. No, being a female trumpeter is definitely tough. And depending on the kind of music too, like jazz, it's always been really hard. Jazz has always been a male bastion for some reason, but it's changing
Slowly,
slowly.
and, you know, it's not fully embracing everybody with open arms yet, but
Yeah.
it's starting to modify. I'm impressed. We now have a symphony group that's, and tour group, that's more women in the trumpet section than there are men, so.
Wow, that's great. And I love seeing more and more women on low brass too. We're seeing a lot more. Yeah.
And we have a couple of dynamite participants to show for us.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Alex,
Yeah.
we have to.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just waiting for the hook, you know. Just make her stop, make her stop. Anyway, thank you so much for your time and your attentiveness in letting me kind of tell you the bedtime story of how we got from 1978 to the future, you know. It's fun to talk about this. So, thank you.